Hello. Thanks for welcoming us over to this event. Really privileged to be here. It's my second time in Berlin, and it's always a fantastic event to come back here. We wanted to put this session together, not to be patronizing with topics such as community building, but we have collectively worked in the industry for 20 odd years each. We're old people in the industry. We have worked on lots of small games. We have worked on extremely big games. We'd love to share with you some trends we're seeing in the community building aspect of it and how the industry is changing. And we would love for you to take some practical advice to help your go-to-market. Anyway, we made some extremely unprofessional slides. I'm so sorry, we're not artists, okay? So I wanted to go around quickly introducing ourselves. So my name is Mitsuo. I work in gaming partnership at Twitch. I've been in the industry for 20, 25, 26 years. I was a developer at EA, Criterion Games. I did all the Harry Potter games and FIFA and all that kind of stuff. And then I moved to PlayStation. I was a publisher, for a long time. And now I work in gaming partnership at Twitch. And I'll hand you over to Wouter.
Hi, it's on. Yay. Thanks for having us. It's great. My name is Wout. For those who don't know me, I've been in the industry for about 23 years now. Started out as a customer service rep for a small French company called Infogram, where in Eindhoven in the Netherlands, where I'm originally from. Then I moved to the UK, where I worked for Sega, for Capcom. After that, I had a little break, and then this man found me somewhere when I was a teacher in Thailand. Came back, worked for 2K, and now I am at Bandai Namco Entertainment Europe as the Senior Director of Communications and Community Engagement, which is everything to do with what we're talking about today. Markus, over to you.
Thanks, Wout. Thanks, everyone, for having me. My name is Markus. I'm these kids. I only have 25 years of experience. I had my 30-year experience anniversary this year in this lovely industry. I started in the hardware business, moved over to AAA, worked at Activision, Rockstar, Take-Two, and for the longest time 2K, where I hired this guy. Then moved over switched. I was in PR for that period of time, then switched from PR to marketing. And from AAA to indie for the last 10 years, I worked at Remote Control Productions for a while, and then the last 7 years at Private Division, Take-Two's indie label that unfortunately got shut down last year. And ever since, I've been working as a consultant, running my own consultancy, working mostly on marketing, business, a little bit of comms, a little bit of everything. And I'm happy to be here today.
Yep, brilliant. So thanks for taking your time today. I know it was a last minute thing for you, Markus, especially. He's extremely busy running the Blizzard business in Germany and the DACH region. So he's a very, very busy guy. We're absolutely privileged to have you and Wouter on stage, the industry veterans and legends. So yeah, it's nice to be on stage. So we wanted to kind of talk about just community building in general. Again, we're not trying to patronize you or ourselves in what community is, but I think it's fair to say that community building is it's almost like a given. You have to put some effort in. You can't put your game on Steam and just hope that it sells. The probability of you succeeding is so low these days. We're definitely seeing media spends going down and more money being spent on community building. I think community management roles, community agencies, they never really existed 2 or 3 decades ago, but now it's almost like a normal thing for people to do these days. So I wanted to kind of go through your experience on what is community, just to kick off with. Wouter, what do you think? What do you say?
It's a very broad question, right? And again, I'm going to repeat you, without being patronizing, what is a community? I think what we see here today is a community. We have communities you have Discord channels with millions of subscribers. And then you have the super small community with 10 people feeding back on a game that just started a development in an indie studio somewhere in Eastern Europe. And that's also a community. So you need to be very careful on how to approach. You need to understand your community before you can really make it work for you, I guess.
Yeah, and I think, you nailed it. A community can be many things, and I think sometimes people don't understand that like a very small community of friends and family at the beginning of a development can already have a big impact and should be listened to. I mean, we're going to talk about community reactions and what to make of it at a later point, but I think it's just very valuable back. I hope I don't do this too often, but back when I started, like community was a bunch of people on the forums, and there were no community managers, or to your point, agencies, and the community was something that especially on the AAA side, you rarely interacted with. And I have one example early on in my career, I learned how important it is, but also how careful you have to be in working with a community. This was in the early 2000s at Take-Two. We had a little game called Mafia, which became over time very popular, specifically in Germany, where I was the PR manager for. And there was no community, nobody dedicated to the community. So at some point, we decided in the marketing department, you might remember this, hey, we should run our own German community. And then me and one of the product managers were like, we volunteered. It's like, oh yeah, we're going to do this on the side. And we started interacting with people on forums and whatnot. And people quickly realized, and we weren't even part of the development, of course. We were just a German subsidiary of the publisher. And yet people were so thirsty for information, because this is in the 2000s. Like there weren't that many. There was no Discord. There was no frequent developer community interaction. And what we felt was something that we do in our lunch break or shortly before we leave. It very quickly turned into a highly demanding job, because we would spend a couple of hours every day and people would still complain that the answers didn't come fast enough and whatnot. So it was we realized very quickly, it's a very passionate community. It's a community that is incredibly thankful for when you work with them and when you interact with them, but they can also very quickly become annoyed when all of a sudden you stop. And so one of the things that I always felt with community is like you have to have dedication and a certain consistency, because once you start building the community, working with the community, you can't stop. Like you have to have a certain level of engagement, and if it becomes too much for you, then you need to find somebody who can do it. But a community is such an important part and can be so helpful, but also hurtful. So you always have to keep your focus on.
So what do you think is a community, Mitsuo?
Well, Twitch is built on community to create communities for the community, right? Without community, Twitch wouldn't exist at all. We don't really see Twitch as a platform to provide content. It's for the community to drive itself. It's where like-minded communities can get together and enjoy the moments together, whether you love FPS, I know we have some creators who love in real life IRL streaming when they're running around the mountainside. I love this old lady who's extremely toxic, but she teaches you cooking. I don't know why I love it, but I kind of keep her, subscribed on it. There's something for everyone, and that kind of defines for me what community is. It's there to cater for your kind of hobbies and interests. We do have a fairly active community on some extremely competitive games like Apex Legends. But I know some folks show up at the forums, show up at the chat, but they don't actually play the game. They love the members there. They like the banter. They like the connection. And I think that really reflects the community types in each game. And then this is my little segue into sliding into more beautiful artwork here, which I may have found using Google. But something that Markus touched on is quite interesting. Communities can be your friend or foe. They could be your best friend, but they could be your best enemy in an instance. I think the delicate nature of managing your community is going to be quite an interesting one. Wouter, do you want to share with us your experience of community shaping in some of the games you worked on?
Yes. It's a bit of a complicated question because there's some stuff I can and cannot talk about working for a listed company. But like I can take the example for the example everybody wants to hear about, get the most questions about, is Elden Ring. As you probably know, Elden Ring released in February 2022. And we followed up with Shadow of the Erdtree a year and a half later, which was a full-on expansion that everybody was waiting for. And the game, the expansion pack came out on a Friday. And I think on Friday evening, we gathered all the community feedback and we sent it back to From Software. And on Monday, the first patch came out and it hit all the different points that we pointed out in our community feedback on Friday evening. So within 3 days, on arguably an expansion for one of the largest games of the past decade, we had a patch out addressing all the community feedback 3 days after release, which I think is the perfect example of how the community can help on making a game better, even after its launch and even in the week of launch. There's also other examples I can give where it goes the other way, but I'll leave that to Markus maybe.
Nice. That could have been a trap. However, I was actually thinking of an example where actually this turned out negatively, which might also then be a segue into how to deal with community feedback. But I want to talk about Kerbal Space Program. Kerbal Space Program, as some of you may know, is a beloved, or was, beloved franchise where you build spaceships or rockets rather realistically, realistic parts, realistic physics, and you shoot them into space. The unrealistic thing are the little green men, the Kerbals that add the humor to it. But it's a very realistic game and beloved around the world. It was a small studio from Mexico City, believe it or not, who created this franchise. It was in early access for a very long time, and then it launched, and millions of people played it. It's got fans in NASA and everywhere. Fantastic. At Private Division, we picked up the franchise. It was one of the first games that we then distributed and kept working on. And of course, Kerbal Space Program 2 was going to be the big successor and our biggest title. Because this was such a community-driven title, it was always very clear from the beginning that we need to listen to the community. It needs to be taken into account, and we wanted to do that. The problem was that the original developer didn't want to work on the game anymore. They wanted to do something else. So we had to build a new development team from scratch. Part of it from the Mexico team, part of them, some of them, the lead designer famously had 3,000 hours of Kerbal Space Program and then joined the team. So everything was set up great. Because the lead designer came from the community, he was also, was a part of the community. He listened to it very hard. Too hard, unfortunately, as it turned out, because he and the team, they were so focused on the community feedback that they tried to bring every idea in, and the game became bigger and bigger. We had to delay it twice. And I mean, feature creep is a big topic regardless of community involvement or not. But this was the biggest element of feature creep I ever saw. And every time we tried to scale it back, as a publisher, the developer was adamant that no, we need to keep it in, because unfortunately the designer also had this tendency, and that's another important part, to talk to the community a lot and talk about features. The PR team loved it. Talked about features that weren't really announced. And then when we realized they're really complicated to implement, he's like, no, we made this promise to the community. We can't let them down. We can't let them down. And in the end, that unfortunately led to such massive feature creep that we, and in the end, had the ultimate letdown for the community. And that was producing a game and releasing a game that wasn't ready. We released it into early access, but even for early access, it wasn't good enough. And that then turned into a massive community backlash because they were all disappointed. Ironically, the reason why they were disappointed was because the developer listened to them too much. And in the end, it became a massive problem. I'm not going to go into the gnarly details of what happens when you release a game into early access too early. That's a different panel, I guess. But it was best intentions gone wrong, and a community-focused approach that I guess the lesson is not everything where you think like not every good deed is well done, and sometimes you can overdo it, and that leads to a negative result in the end.
Yeah, I think I worked on the launch of Arc Raiders and Battlefield 6 on Twitch. And what we've kind of known about it is the community, the world, internet at large, they seem to have an insatiable appetite for content, right? So even if the game took 5 years to make, they'd usually finish the game within like a week or so, and they're asking for content, they're asking for updates. So I think you need to kind of manage your community expectations. Like Markus says, you can't just be the best friends in community and not being able to deliver. So I think that's a really, really important one. The other one I definitely love to kind of bring to your, to the table here is structuring and designing your game to be able to accept, constant changes or not. If you have a game like, I don't know, Uncharted or The Last of Us, it's a single player game. You can't be releasing patches. The game is it's not a service, right? So, whereas you might have games that allow modding or role playing, whether it's like DayZ or like, Minecraft, those are specifically designed from day one to allow the community to drive its own content. So as a developer, you're just offering the environment and the tools to let the community drive itself, its content. If we have like a game made by Media Molecule called Dreams, where it allows gamers to make their own games and mini games within a game. And what they did was they accepted community content, and the community upvoted which levels were good, and then the really good levels got officially accepted into the main game as an official, verified. So I think, when you're designing your game, really being thoughtful about how you're going to engage community and whether you can actually fulfill that promise, I think is going to be quite an interesting one. Which leads me on to the next slide. But yeah,
I just wanted to add something on what Markus said earlier on about listening to the community and getting the community in touch with the development team. I think, and this is why there is a very good reason to have community managers or a community team, is to be that buffer, to be that filter. It's something that my team at Bandai Namco does. We collect all the player feedback, coming from customer service, coming from Discord, coming from Reddit, coming from people emailing us randomly saying, hey, you should do this. We package all of that up and we send it to the developer in a report. We don't send individual requests on, and we kind of filter it, and it really helps the development studios to then figure out what's more important than something else. And I think the pitfall that you, as an example, gave is that the lead designer was talking to everybody directly and promising things they shouldn't, which is also something a developer shouldn't do, especially when you're working on a larger title with a larger team, because I feel like people take promises very, very seriously, especially in gaming. So if you say you're going to do A, you have to do A. You can't just pivot to B a little bit. Anyway, so I thought that was
It's a good observation and it makes total sense. If you're part of a listed company with hundreds of employees, as an indie dev, like that's a bit of a problem. Like the developer, as a developer, you kind of have to talk to community because you don't have the luxury of having a community manager or even a community team. But that's actually a good point here. The topic of community views versus creative vision. How much do we let the community influence it? We had the negative examples, we had the positive examples. And I think the key in this regard, as it is in many regards, is communication. It's like, what I mean by that is listen to the community, take the feedback on board. But that doesn't mean that you have to change your game all the time because the community says they want something. But what you should be doing is to feed back to the community, make them know and understand that they are being heard. And then give reasons why you're not changing it, like taking the feedback into account, addressing it, whether it's positively or negatively. The community will enjoy hearing from you and will enjoy feeling that they are being listened to. But again, that shouldn't influence every decision you make. It's still your game and your vision.
There's always going to be the vocal minority, right, who on Twitter land or Steam forums who can be your best friend or your worst enemy, right? So when I used to work for a small indie publisher, we literally didn't have community managers. So we all had to kind of, reply to all the questions and concerns and stuff. And what we did with the limited resource we had was to try to identify who the ringleader is, who's the most vocal hater on Twitter or whatever, right? And what we did was we really listened to this person's concern. And then after listening to hundreds of feedback, we managed to implement maybe 2 or 3 changes. But by sheer fact of us kind of keeping this person updated and saying, thank you so much for your input. We have bandwidth issues, but we, took your opinions on board and we fixed these 3 things for it. And because of your changes, the game is in a better place. Thank you very much. And just even that lip service converted the biggest hater to the biggest ambassador for us. And we never paid this guy, and he just kept promoting our game, on the forum. He was in all these sub forums that I've never even heard of, just championing us. And that was a really good moment. So we made a habit of going through negative feedback in Steam and actually responding to each one. Even if you can't do anything with it, just the fact that you're trying to kind of listen to them seems to go a long way.
Yeah, you see certain developers as well, they call out community members if they change something in the game, which I really like. It's regrettably something that in my position I can't do, but something I would love to do. One of the things you just said made me think about another company I didn't work for, so I won't name them, but they actually have the community vote for their ambassadors, who will then come to the studio and talk to the development team about what the community wants. It's kind of like a really political way, a democratic way to approach community feedback, which I really loved, and also something I at one point want to implement, because it's great to get face-to-face time with the community, or at least with some of them.
Yeah, and I think I was just been thinking about small studios and indies. I think it's still worth, even if you're a small studio, to designate a person to be maybe not the community manager, but the one to collect feedback. We talked about collecting feedback, and that person probably shouldn't necessarily be the lead designer, because it's all of your game is the baby of all of you, but it's probably the biggest baby of whoever is the project lead, and they take it the most to heart. And so maybe it is somebody who has a different role and can be ever so slightly be more objective than somebody who is investing every waking hour and minute into it.
Yeah. But I think the key takeaway is intent and being open with it, because I remember when Minecraft was being developed, they were really open during development. They didn't, they didn't promise everything, but they were really open with that. So I think that's one of the key reasons they already had a community first design, community open comms process, and it is the multi-billion-dollar IP now that it is. So yeah, I think community is so difficult to get it right. But I think once you do have a good community behind you, that's half of your battle done, and you don't have to spend as much money on paid media and things to kind of impress them, because the community themselves can kind of self drive the momentum the game has.
I don't think you can switch on a community, right? It's not like I sometimes hear some execs in our company saying, "Oh, we should have a community for this game," and I'm like, "But that's not what you do. Like, you have to make sure that people get excited about your game, that will then become your community." And I think that's where copywriting, for example, can come in really helpful. Where if you can have a really good paragraph on what your game is before anyone can play it or see it, you can get people excited about it. Like, I don't know, an immersive RPG with vampires, like, it will get people triggered, and those people will get, "Oh, I want to see what this developer is doing." And of course, it helps if you already have people on your team that have worked on narrative RPGs before, or if you have some kind of legacy or if it's even easier when you have a sequel, right? But like when you have to start from scratch, you really need to make sure that you find a way to excite people, and that could be with a demo, or it could be with a very interesting written paragraph. And please don't rely on ChatGPT for that, because creative writing is something that AI hasn't mastered yet. But I think that could be. You need to have a spark for a community. It's not something that you just switch on. You need to bring people together with a mutual passion, and I think that's what really is community, right?
Yeah. Moving on. I know we touched on this slightly, but depending on, I think the game design you have, whether you're single player, if you're game as a service, your live ops service, whether you're dealing with a local issue versus a global issue, I think there's a lot of different strategies that you need to be very aware of. Markus or Wouter, do you guys have any examples that resonates with you with regards to having a very different strategy, whether in the topics you see here, global, local, or online, offline?
I have something that I need to sort my thoughts.
Okay, yeah. So I can give a very simple example to understand is esports, especially fighting game esports. So I'm lucky enough to work on the Tekken franchise, and we do a global tournament called the Tekken World Tour. This year, the finals in Malmö in Europe, so I'm very happy that it's coming to Europe this year. But basically, we're dealing with all these small local communities everywhere that love playing Tekken together. And we had to find a way to bring them all together on a global stage, which is the Tekken World Tour now. But on the other end, that's only for half a year. And it's all offline, because you have to be in the same room to be able to play in the tournament. So what we did is we created a dojo system where people can play offline and bring that together in an online leaderboard, because you get points for every tournament you play in. So that was part one to create the Tekken World Tour, local communities coming together in one global community. The other example is the European Tekken Cup we designed, which is actually an online tournament where you can create points and then can be invited to the the EMEA final to become the European champion in Tekken. So I kind of covered everything that's on that slide, I think. So yeah, good. Yeah, okay. Over to you then, Markus.
You covered it all. Now it's me. Because you covered it all, I'm going to do a slight pivot, which is adapting community strategy, or rather adapting your focus when talking to community. So, because that's something, and I think just focusing on the word adapting, because that is something that you really need to be quick on your feet, and react to how your community is doing and how your community is feeling. And that can go different ways. I don't want to talk all night about Kerbal Space Program, but one of the things we did after the more or less catastrophic launch into early access was to indeed change our strategy in adapting with how to work with the community. We put our foot down on the publisher side and said, no, Nate, lead designer, you don't talk to them anymore. You focus on making the game better. And we're going, but it wasn't like, oh, you're not allowed to talk anymore. It was more about, we're going to explain to the community why the developer is now basically going into, not shutdown, but into lockdown, whatever, communication lockdown, so to speak. It's like, yes, we heard you and we listened to you, and please trust us that we heard all of your frustrations too. But for now, the developer has to focus on that one thing. And we are going to step in, and we're going to, as a publisher, and we're going to communicate, and we're going to keep you updated. But please, and again, this goes back to what I said earlier about you raise expectations when you interact with the community. You can't just all of a sudden stop doing that and then I think that everything is going to be fine. If you change, if you adapt, if you change your strategy, you need to communicate it clearly. And in this case, it was really it was a big letter from Nate to the community saying, we heard you, I understand you're disappointed, we're disappointed too. And also please understand that now we're going to focus entirely on making the game better, making the game that you deserve. Please understand we can't be as communicative for a while as we used to. And then we stepped in and took over communication for a while, and it eventually eased back into this. So, as to not speak just negatively all the time, the positive example on our end was, a recent example was at Private Division was No Rest for the Wicked, which is an ARPG developed by Moon Studios, the Ori team. And here we had the opposite. We launched into early access, high expectations, but they were met. People were super excited. But what we also realized after launch into early access that people were super excited for different reasons than we thought they would be. It was all about, like, they delivered a beautiful game, gorgeous world, and an interesting story and characters. People didn't care. People cared about the combat mechanics. Arguably, they were interesting. They were more, it looks like a Diablo game, but it plays like a Souls-like and a more tactical combat. And people were fascinated by that. Our communication was all about, like, not all, but a lot about the world and the characters and whatnot to the community. And we had surveys like, which character do you like best and whatnot? And we quickly realized, like, that's not really what the community cares about. The community cares about builds and weapon loadouts and whatnot. And so we, together with the developer, completely revamped our communication strategy to the community. Just as we understood, like, it wasn't like people were criticizing what we were doing, they were just not that interested. And that's, again, like listening to the community and making sure that you adapt your strategy based on what you're hearing. Like, keep listening, I think, is always important.
Yeah, just listen to your community, find out what gets them excited, and feed them with that. I think that's the best way to do it. And yeah, so don't ignore what they stand for. And I think the biggest takeaway of community management is just, always listen. Yeah, just listen. That's the last slide, right? Listen.
Yes. No. my wife works for the airlines, and when flight is delayed, passengers gets really angry, and the worst thing she doesn't do anymore, is to not say anything. Even if there's no new flight time, it's always best to be very, very upfront with your passengers about, all that kind of stuff. So I think for community management, definitely communication is definitely key. Don't overpromise. Have the right strategy, whether it's local, global, what type of game, you're making, what kind of community, what they like to see in the game. I think those are the really things that we need to identify. We're going to talk about case studies, but we've talked a lot about those ones because obviously, some of those games have had some turbulent birth when they got launched, but we're not going to talk about that because I think you guys all know about it. So, games like No Man's Sky and Cyberpunk, as you know, had a very, very difficult launch, but over the years they have kind of kept updated with the community and redeemed themselves. I think those are like, for us in the industry, it's like the gold star standards of how community should work in these games.
I know you wanted to skip over it, and we've got a lot to talk about, but I do want to point out No Man's Sky, because to me, this one stands out amongst all of them. Cyberpunk, also good story, but No Man's Sky, I think, is the absolute perfect example about something that we haven't talked about, and it is potentially being intimidated by your community. No Man's Sky had an extremely rough launch, and it wasn't, I still like to think it wasn't due to what the developer did, but not to point fingers, but the publisher, in this case, Sony.
Sorry.
Oversold the game. It's like they...
Soren, you too. Yeah, you too.
Yeah, you're failures here. No, they did it, the cardinal sin, and I've done this too, so I can relate, of like, we did this at Private Division 2, where we created the most beautiful trailers that make the game look like AAA when it was an indie game. And to a degree, it was here, whereas like people had, the expectations became so high because marketing did a really good job in promoting the game that the developer couldn't really deliver at launch. And it was a terrible launch when it comes to community. Like, really, the community was mad, the community was upset. And they could have packed up the things and go. I mean, they were fine. They were funded and everything. And they really, it was so admirable what they did, in that they continued to deliver content. They continued to communicate. They stood strong in the face of adversity, not to sound too pathological, but it was interesting. And it was fantastic to see how step by step, they won the community back. It wasn't done overnight. I remember even like 6 months later when they announced yet another free update, and the majority was still negative. People were like, oh yeah, whatever. It's like, I already sold the game. I don't care anymore. A year later, 2 years later, it's like it's getting better and better. And I think that's something that's important. You also mentioned that story about the biggest hater that turned into the biggest evangelist. It's like the community and the internet, as we all know, can be rough out there. But like, if you persist, if you communicate, if you deliver over time, and don't expect just because you deliver a free patch that everybody will love you, but over time, if you people will recognize, and eventually will get your efforts and appreciate them, and then that will turn the tide slowly.
Yeah, and I think No Man's Sky is a very great example of a developer delivering his vision to the community, saying, this is the game I want to make and this is what I promise you. But then when the game releases, it's not even close, because he promised the game that it will be 5 years after launch. And I think that's also something you have to be very careful of. And I think No Man's Sky would have been a fantastic early access, but that wasn't even on the radar back then, right? So I think the redemption story of No Man's Sky is the studio just keeping to what they promised, what they delivered. They never said, okay, we're not doing this anymore because we promised this 2 years ago, we're not touching this anymore. No, they kept going, and in the end they delivered, and it's a fantastic game now. Too much content, in my opinion, maybe.
Yeah, it's just even 3 days ago, Arc Raiders lowered their price for in-game monetization, and that was a direct result from, I guess, community feedback. And they lowered the price, announced it, and lowered the price within, I think, 24 hours. And that was terrible, but it also was a very positive news 24 hours later. So I think if you do spot some fire, put it out very quickly. Be prepared to be humbled by your community, because they could make or break your game, literally.
The amount of comments I saw on that specific topic, by the way, all said, oh, by the way, I'm going to buy a lot of stuff in their shop now. So it could be a really good, sales technique as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we kind of close our session, we wanted to give our final thoughts on what we're seeing from community engagement perspective. Do you guys have any? I mean, certainly from Twitch. Twitch is all about community. We're seeing a lot of games on, the role of influencers is so important these days. Obviously, Twitch, we need the creators need games, vice versa. So, we have this asymbiotic relationship, right? So I think there's a time and place for paid media, definitely, but there's definitely to give your game prolonged longevity on Twitch and having your game awareness out there for the long term, you definitely need community to kind of carry that weight, because I'm sure as, indies and even AAA publishers, we don't necessarily have the paid media budget forever and ever. And I think the best place to be, is games like, community-driven games like Minecraft, where they don't necessarily have to, or GTA as an example, where they don't necessarily have to spend so much money on paid media anymore, because the tools are there. The community is driving its own content, and they're kind of self-policing their own ecosystem, which is a really, really nice place to be. Now, I know this doesn't apply to all game types, but I'm just saying the power of community is, I think it's getting super, super important. It's more prevalent. There's full-time jobs and careers in community management. It is a really serious role. You're at the forefront of company PR, and it's such an important area that I probably didn't have much, sympathy for earlier in my career. Now it's like so important. Yeah.
So one of the things that I want to make very clear, by the way, is community is not social media. They're two very different things. And I hear a lot of people say like, oh yeah, community, social media, they do everything and nothing at the same time. For me, community management is something very different than social media management. And it's a job on itself. And community management is one of the toughest jobs in marketing overall, because you're dealing with a lot of emotions from people, and it can take a toll on people very quickly. So yeah, please look after your community manager's mental health. It's a very important topic. But yeah, like for me, like one of the things I see is that now higher ups at publishers are taking community management seriously. They're creating jobs for it. They are asking, like I mentioned earlier on, hey, create a community here. And then I go, no, make a good game. Because those go hand in hand as well. Great games usually have larger and more active communities. Shocker, right? But yeah, so I think communities are becoming more and more important for games. And I think when you pitch to publishers and you already have a healthy community behind you, it will certainly be a driver, I think.
I've got two trends with two examples of two clients of mine currently. One is my smallest client and one is my biggest client. My smallest client is a company called Wilson Studio. Wilson is originally a studio from Romania. They now have an office in France as well. They released a game called Wilson a few years ago, which was let's face it, a Diablo ripoff, released to mediocre review scores and mixed consumer emotions, so to speak, but it's a very popular genre, and over time it sold quite a lot, more than 1 million copies. They're currently working on a sequel, and what they do, because of the mixed reactions from both the community and the press, they're taking a very, very radical, they call it community-driven development approach. And that is really exceptional the way they do it, where literally they involve the community from day one and they do constant surveys. They constantly interact with the community. They can do it because it's an existing community, so they don't have to build from scratch. And of course, it always applies what we said earlier. It's don't take everything on board or else you're going to crash and burn. But they don't do that either. But they started not when they launched a demo or a beta and then took feedback on board. They started from the very, very beginning when they asked what did players like and didn't like about the first game and reacted accordingly, then made suggestions. The development team came up with about the world setting, about the player classes, literally everything. And they keep hammering down that point. Our development is community driven. So it's a very radical approach to this degree. I haven't seen it anywhere else, but it's shaping up. I mean, the game is going to be released next year. We're going to see, but they already, just by doing it, they brought over a community who there were lots of people say, I'm never going to buy a game by these guys again because it was a rough start. And they brought them over. They're all they feel like they're part of the development now. And in this case, they really are. The other thing is my biggest client, Blizzard, currently, and I only started working with them about 4 or 5 weeks ago. And I expected them to be very opaque and very we do our own thing, a little bit like Rockstar. Because there was a time a few years ago when Blizzard really wasn't the best in terms of communicating, especially with their community. Don't you guys have phones and stuff like that? And what I learned in the first 2 weeks is this has changed quite dramatically. And this goes back to your point. It seems that finally AAA publishers and AAA studios are acknowledging. I mean, there are some that when you work on Call of Duty and Battlefield, it's it's extremely community, not driven these days, but the community is something that I feel have listened for a long time. But even a company like Blizzard is now very much everyone I talk to is oh yeah, and the community wants this feature and they didn't like that feature, and there's tons of surveys there. So yeah, it seems that something that was deeply rooted in indies, we're part of the community, we're building this, is now finally being discovered more and more often by AAA companies as well, which is a good thing.
Yeah. Just as a shameless final plug, Twitch also has a lot of developer tools that would make your game and stream on Twitch very, very community focused. For example, the most popular tool we have is called Twitch Drops, where you come and watch your game on Twitch, and then the viewer can earn an in-game reward, right? So making the viewing more rewarding and helps with the user engagement and all that kind of stuff. So we have a lot of programs for developers to kind of take on within our Twitch products and things. So we urge you to, come and come and speak to us and explore how you can improve, community building and engagement and user expansion, using platforms like Twitch as well. So as we wrap up,
can I say one more thing about platforms, because I think that's a very good point. Twitch is a great platform. I love it.
Thank you. Is there a but coming?
No, there's an and coming.
Oh.
When it comes to community management and where your communities are, like one thing I've noticed in the past years is that a Discord is great to be owned by a developer or a publisher to have the community conversation and gather them. But please don't create your own Reddit page. Let the community do that for you, because the worst thing that can happen is a publisher Reddit that talks about their game all the time with this marketing voice, and the community will just shut off. Like, let them be themselves and create their own community on Reddit. And of course you can engage with them there, but don't go there and say like, oh, well, this is actually what we want you to see right now. Because the community sees through that straight away. If you want to have that conversation, do it on Discord, because Discord is a really great place where your core fans can gather. And then of course you post a nice link to your stream on Twitch.
Of course.
That was my free plug for you. There you go.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I hope that's been useful, insightful, some examples that you may want to have ideas to implement to your kind of go-to-market planning. So I wanted to kind of pass the mic over to you guys to kind of, have, if you guys have any comments or questions you may have for us, please do raise your hand and we'll get a mic over to you. So please just ask us anything. We're more than happy to. Oh, there's some folks.
I need your mic. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
I was wondering, how much are you involved in the discourse, also in terms of maybe giving an audience something to speculate on, or like, starting those conversations and for them to keep talking about the games?
I have a really great example for that, actually. I think it was in June, we opened our Discord for Little Nightmares. And the Little Nightmares brand is something that the fans love speculating about. And we sometimes, like our community manager for Little Nightmares, Maya, she sometimes just goes in there and drops like one line. The game doesn't have any dialogue in it, but she just drops one line that creates an atmosphere, and then people just go wild and speculate about that stuff. You drop in a screenshot and there's something hidden in the back. What is that? And then the speculations go, I think for a game like Little Nightmares, that works really well. There's other ways to explore it, but I think it's something that I really like my team to do as well, is to get these conversations going. I would love to, for example, like maybe you'll see this in the next season of Tekken, where we just have like one silhouette of an announced character and just have the community guess which character it is. That would be something super fun. So
I think just on that point on Discord and other social media channels, I know for a fact that when I was in development, we used to keep an eye out for trending complaints or trending requests, because sometimes when game designers are designing their game, they're a bit blinkered in terms of how they think the game's going to. There's a tendency for humans to make the game that they like, but not necessarily what the gamers want. So, some of them may never admit that they take ideas from Discord servers, but they do. I know they do. So, yeah. So keep posting. Any other questions?
Yeah. Hello. Thank you for your talk. I wanted to ask you, for small teams that are just starting out, they don't maybe have a partnership with a publisher or anything like that. And maybe you addressed this at the beginning because I arrived late, so sorry. What would be a good starting point be? Because if I want to build up a community, I feel like of a game that only like 4 people have been building, nobody has any clue about it. I don't know how far it gets if I just start tweeting weird stuff. Not weird stuff, but promoting my game just like that.
I love that question. Thank you. Because this happens often. I do pitching workshops for Press Start and others, where often my audience is young teams working on their first game. And that question comes up a lot, especially because, and this is again how the industry is changing, it used to be that, and sometimes developers still have that hesitancy of starting to build a community themselves because they think, well, in order to do that, I have to talk about my game. I shouldn't talk about my game because once I find a publisher, the publisher will want to announce the game in a big splash and they would hate me taking away all of the surprise announcement and all that. That, fortunately, I think has changed a lot. And as a publisher, I would actually be, I actually think a publisher will look at this favorably if you started building a community early. Because there's so many reasons. One that you just mentioned earlier, this whole thing of like the development bubble. You do the game that you want to make, but like, is it really a game for a larger audience? And having a community is a great gauge of whether you're going into the right direction, hopefully, or not. But what I'm thinking is like, you cannot start early enough. Like, however, what I would caution is scale. As like at the beginning, and we said this, oh, you weren't there. At the very beginning, the question was like, what is a community? And a community can be the traditional friends and family, your 3 mates and your aunt who loves video games, and you let them play the game and get the first feedback. That's a very close-knit, small community. But then you take it from there. What I notice that a lot of developers are doing, and what I always try to encourage is start going on social media early. Drop a screenshot as we just said. Drop a screenshot on Discord already, and ask people for feedback. Do a quick animation clip and throw it on TikTok and see what people think. I think starting early is a good thing. It also helps you again gain traction. You can, when you talk about the game to publishers, investors, or other partners, you can already show that, usually on a smaller scale, but you're already generating interest for the game. So yeah, I think starting early is a good thing.
And just to add to that, I think Reddit could be a fantastic platform for this because, you know, if you do something on social media like Twitter, you might not have the followers. And who's going to see your screenshot? But if you do it on like /rs gaming or something like that, where there already are 1 million people looking at it on a daily basis, yeah, your post might not get picked up or seen, but it's out there and you can link it to people, and the more people click on it, then the more people see it, and the better it will do in the algorithm. And I think... And don't just stick with one Reddit, but go to many different subreddits, and you'll increase your chances for a very low output.
Yeah, in the case study, we put a picture of Among Us. I think that's a very good example where content creators, you know, got together and it really kind of set fire to the whole momentum, right? And that was used by Congresswoman Andrea Cortez, who used Among Us to connect directly with, you know, the younger voters and stuff. So, you know, it can, go in multiple ways, but definitely it's not, there is no magic silver bullet. It is hard work, but sometimes you do get 1 or 2 very vocal ambassadors who will organically really like your game and then really help propel you when you don't have the budget for paid media and stuff. So yeah, hopefully it'll definitely work for you. But definitely do stay in touch with all the platforms, all the publishers, and then I'm really hoping that's going to work out. Anyone got any other final question?
One last
we got
here.
one last question.
40 seconds left.
It's already orange.
Okay, for the first thing, thank you very much for the talk. When you talked about the problem that there might be some issues with dealing all of those requests from a community, like you already said, they are very passionate about a game, they're very passionate about their requests because they want to help to improve the game. From your personal experience, were there some times that some of the requests or some things that were like pitched to the developers were just not, well, they seemed unreasonable, or they seemed like a bit out of hand? Like, how do you manage to at some point disappoint the people you don't want to disappoint?
So very quickly for me, and then I'll give it to you, Markus, because I think this is touching you more. I think as a developer, you also need to understand that most of your community are not video game developers. They might request stuff that they have no idea about how to implement it in a game. And therefore, I think the way you want to deal with that is to answer, say like, this is a great idea. Regrettably, it's technically impossible to implement, or it would cost X amount of money, and we don't have that, something like that. I don't necessarily want to put a number on it, I guess, but I think being transparent and honest with your community is super important, and that will keep them engaged longer.
Yep, that actually probably would have been my answers. I actually, Wout raised an excellent point, which is you don't know, you have no idea about the knowledge of your community in terms of games development. So even, and take that into account. Obviously, you always want to be courteous, you always want to be nice, but like some of the requests may be completely ridiculous or sound to you completely ridiculous, impossible to do, but like they're gamers, they don't know. They just want to see a cool game. So again, acknowledge that. It's like it's more important for the community to understand that you're listening to them and that their voices are being heard than you saying yes to everything. Or else you end up with Kerbal Space Program 2, and that's not a good idea. So yeah, be transparent, be communicative, and sometimes you can always it doesn't mean that you have to respond immediately to every request. That's the problem that we had when back in the days I tried to be a community manager and I felt I had to answer everything immediately, because then you train people and you set expectations. But what you can do is tell people like, hey, quick update in this week. We've listened to a lot of your feedback. We're currently looking into what's feasible and what's not, and we're going to get back to you shortly. Sometimes a simple update like that is enough. You don't need to go into great details about every single thing all the time. Just make sure, as Wouter said, be transparent, be courteous, be communicative, and then that will help your community deal with the wait time to your answers.